Welcome back, and we now welcome to the show Justin Ballard, meteorologist from the Houston Chronicle. Welcome.
Happy New Year.
Yes, we haven't seen each other yet, have we?
No, we haven't.
So talk of the polar vortex has spread like wildfire on social media, and it turns out there's a big misunderstanding about what it actually is. So tell us a little bit more about what your research has revealed on this cold topic.
So I was able to speak with the state climatologist last week, John Nilsen Gammon.
He's a good guy.
He's good. He's quite a character when you're interviewing him, I'll tell you that. The easiest way to kind of explain the polar vortex is that it's basically a strong winds aloft that kind of help bottle up the coldest of the cold air right over typically the North Pole, the Arctic regions, also the South Pole, the southern half of the world. But that really is something that's pretty constant. It's been there since, as long as we can recall.
Right, and it's when it weakens or it breaks down, then we care because that can send Arctic air. And we've actually got some of that coming our way late this weekend. Here's a look at our temperature map. So right now, the Arctic air is just now crossing the U.S.-Canadian border. So let's go up to old Canada, shall we?
I think we shall.
Yikes!
29 below, 45 below, 36 below.
51 in Old Crow. That's the cold air that is coming down.
Below, though, in the day. So, at least it's not cold everywhere.
So is there an even easier way to describe what the polar vortex is?
I'm so glad you asked, because I asked John Nilsen Gammon, and I wanted to know if you had to write a polar vortex for dummies, what would it sound like?
A strong winds at high altitudes blowing from west to east around the pole.
So that simple explanation is kind of the best way of explaining what the polar vortex is if you had to write a polar vortex for dummies.
All right, so now that we know what the polar vortex is, what is it not?
Well, John Nilsen Gammon said it's definitely not a storm system. Take a listen.
But it's also not something new, even though it's only made the news in the past few years. We've known there was the wind circulated around the pole at high altitudes ever since we started launching high altitude balloons at high latitudes in the late 40s and 50s.
So it's been a thing for a while. It's definitely nothing new. It's not new to any of us in meteorology.
Right.
It's just a term that we've kind of latched onto in recent years.
So now that we know what it is and what it is not, has it ever visited Texas? Now,
I was surprised to find this out, but take a listen.
Well, the polar vortex never makes it this far south. But even if the center is over, say, the Great Lakes or Hudson's Bay, there's going to be winds blowing from the north across Canada down into the central United States, and a lot of that cold air is going to make it down to Texas. So we don't get the polar vortex air per se. We get air that's brought down from the Arctic in Canada by the polar vortex.
I had to put on my poker face for that answer. I didn't even realize that, and I've been doing this for 6-7 years. Went through school as well, so that answer even shocked me.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people on social media, starting around late December, early January, saying, is the polar vortex coming to Texas? And we're thinking, of course not. It's almost physically impossible for that to happen. But when it moves its weight around, it can shove that Arctic air down the plains and into the state.
And it certainly does, and that's part of the reason why Texas is more susceptible than others kind of in our latitude of the world here in the Lone Star State, and John Nilsen Gammon kind of explained that just a little bit.
Of course, we aren't going to get as cold as places farther north, so we're not unusually susceptible in that sense. We are somewhat more susceptible compared to other places at our latitude because the Rocky Mountains tend to form a barrier to cold air that might otherwise move westward, and instead it gets channeled southward along the side of the Rocky Mountains through the high plains in Texas. And
so there's two things we can blame the Rocky Mountains for. One is Arctic fronts down into Texas and a whole lot of tornadoes that come into the plains and eastward.
And you said it, the word best, cold air damming. That's exactly what's happening. The cold air is being bottled south and can't really go west.
You got to go south and then spread east.
That's right.
That's why we got Arctic air on the way this weekend.
We have Canada to look forward to.
That's right. We will stay on top of Canada's weather coming to Texas in the days ahead. Thanks for joining us today.